Greetings and welcome back for another Music Theory Bite. In this video, I'm going to show you how to take a harmonic dictation. If that sounds like something you'd like to learn more about, then this is the video for you. Harmonic dictation is the ability to write down the succession of chords that you hear in a piece of music. In most cases, most music will give you a full texture, that is, a melody, a bass line, and chords that fill out the entire musical fabric. And it's simply a matter of listening to those elements and figuring out what chords you're hearing. In some cases, however, we might just have part of that. We might just have a melody, and since all tonal music implies some sort of underlying harmonic framework, we could even take a harmonic dictation if we just hear a single melody. We'll save that for another video. Today we're going to do the easy thing, and we're going to listen to a blocked chord progression and take dictation, that is, write down the Roman numerals that go into that progression. But before you do that, you need to make sure that you understand how harmonic progression works. You need to have an understanding of what should happen in order to figure out what actually does happen. And I have a video for that. You should check out my video on harmonic progression. You should also check out my video on spelling and resolving dominant seventh chords, because those are an important element for understanding what it is that you hear in a tonal harmonic environment. So when we start to take a harmonic dictation, there are a series of steps that we can take. Now, remember that music always presents itself in its own way, meaning that if I give you a series of steps, it's not going to work for every piece of music. Each piece of music will tell you, if you're listening closely enough, how to take its dictation. In most cases, however, if we have this series of steps, we can kind of figure out what we need to do to figure out the harmonic progression, and if there's something that doesn't quite work, we can kind of move those steps around and then redo those steps in such a way so that we can actually take that harmonic dictation. But today we're going to keep it nice and simple. Those steps are, first, set up a nice clean workspace. Next, listen. Don't write anything down. Close your eyes and just listen to the music as music. What you're trying to get from that second step goes into step 3, and that's identifying the big picture stuff. What's your meter? What mode are you in? How many phrases are there? Those are the sorts of things that will help you kind of figure out the guidelines and the boundaries of what you're working with. The next step is to find your dominants. Dominants are the placeholders in tonal music. When we identify those dominants, dominant chords can only resolve a handful of places in very specific ways, so we're going to make sure that we identify those dominants first, and then we figure out how those dominants resolve, which is step 5. Find the resolution of those dominants. After that, it'd be a good idea to dictate the bass line, because that will tell us a couple of things. First of all, it will confirm our harmonic progression, and second, it will tell us what chord inversions we have in the progression. Sometimes you'll find it helpful to start by dictating the bass line and then go into finding the dominants. So that's the step that kind of moves around in this whole thing. Once you get that, you've found your dominants, you likely have found most of your tonics once you know where your dominants are. And so now it's just a matter of filling in the chords in between, and we'll do that by listening for the predominant function chords, chord qualities, and checking that against our bass line. Finally, we want to proofread. That is, take a look at the progression, see if you can hear it in your head, and see if you can match it up with what you just heard during the dictation exercise. So if you're ready, let's try this out. Let's begin. So step 1 is to set up my workspace, and that's exactly what I've done here. I gave myself a grand staff with plenty of measures. Hopefully this will be enough for what I'm doing, and I have everything ready to go. Now in this particular example, I'm just going to be dictating a Roman numeral analysis, that is the harmonic progression, and the bass line. And your theory teacher might ask you to write down some other pieces of information, such as a melody line that goes along with the harmonic progression. But for right now, we're just going to leave it exactly like this, writing only a bass line and the Roman numeral analysis. So step 1, set up your workspace. I got that. Let's move on to step 2. Step 2, the most important step. Close your eyes, put your pencil down, and listen. Listen for the big picture stuff. I'm going to want to get a sense of the meter, and I'm going to listen for modality. Is this a progression in the major mode or in the minor mode. I'm also going to listen for any elements such as texture or repeated elements that I know I'm going to have to pay attention to later on. This is also where I'd be listening for chromaticism, modulation, those sorts of things. This progression is entirely diatonic. There are no chromatic chords in there, so I know I don't have to worry about any of that. It does not modulate, and it's a block chord texture, meaning I'm not going to have to decipher where the chord tones are in the musical fabric. So this is, in a sense, one of the easier types of textures that we're going to deal with. So here we go. I'm closing my eyes, and I'm just listening. Alright, so from that I already know a little bit of information. I know it is block chords, and I know that it's in the major mode. I don't know what key because I don't have absolute pitch, so I'm just going to kind of take a guess and go with a fairly easy key. How about D major? So I'll write in my key signature. I think that's pretty close to where it was actually played. And metrically, it was all fairly even chords. Now, if I think about how many chords there were, I was kind of hearing it as grouped into measures of 4 chords. So I heard what kind of resembled a cadence there, and another one there, and then I was lucky enough to have written the exact correct number of measures in this case. So I have 11 chords throughout the whole thing, and I hear a suggestion of a cadence here, suggestion of a cadence here, and a final cadence here at the end. So I now have the temporal aspect filled in. Now, as far as meter goes, the beat that I heard was something like this, and I could write it in a couple of different ways. Each chord took up 1 measure, which is the normal harmonic rhythm for a piece in tonal music. Sometimes it will speed up as we get towards a cadence. In this case, it didn't sound like the harmonic progression, the harmonic rhythm changed at all, so I'm going to write them all as the same note value. And I could pick 4/4, I could pick 3/4, whatever I want to do with it. And in this case, I'm going to say we're just going to do it in 2/4. So every chord is going to be a half note as I write it along. That's just randomly picking a note value. I could pick quarter notes if I wanted to, in which case I would have 1/4 as my meter signature. So you can choose what meter signature you want to use from this point. Now, we have set up our workspace. That was step 1. We've listened to it. That was step 2. And step 3, we got a bunch of the big picture stuff. We're now on to step 4, and this is a very important step in the process. I want to find my dominant function chords. I think of dominant function chords as being like placeholders in the tonal environment. When I'm listening to a piece of music and I want to know where tonic is, I can find that by finding a dominant which points me towards that tonic. Now, there's a trick for doing this. If you've been doing this as long as I have, you probably will hear the music and you can just say, oh, that's a dominant chord. If you haven't been doing it as long as I have, then oftentimes you need a little bit of help. And the trick that you can use to help yourself out is realizing that there are certain scale degrees that are defining of the various harmonic functions. We know that a tonic scale degree will always fit in a tonic chord. So scale degree 1 will always fit in a tonic chord. It also helps out that tonic also fits in predominant chords. So we know that if we can sing scale degree 1 and it sounds good in the chord, then we know that we're dealing with either a tonic or a predominant function chord. Tonic scale degrees don't work so well in dominant function chords, meaning that I'm going to have to slide my scale degree 1 down to scale degree 7 to make it work, make it sound okay in a dominant function chord. So what I'm really listening for when I'm finding my dominance is where does scale degree 1 have to slide down to scale degree 7. So as I listen to it this time, I'm going to sing along scale degree 1, and then when scale degree 1 doesn't fit, I'm going to slide it down to scale degree 7, and whenever I do that, that is a dominant function chord. I'll figure out the specific dominant function chord a little bit later on. I just want to find those dominants. In many ways, taking harmonic dictation, it's more important that we find the harmonic functions than the specific chord. We'll worry about the specific chords once we know what the harmonic functions are. So this time through, da, I think that's my tonic. I'm going to use that, and I'm going to sing along this time, and I'm going to sing either scale degree 1 or scale degree 7 on each of these chords, and when I sing scale degree 7, I know that's a dominant function chord. Da, 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 da. So you'll notice that I found 4 dominant function chords in this. The 3rd chord, the 5th chord, the 7th chord, and the 10th chord. That is the second last chord. So I already know an awful lot about this. I know it starts on tonic. Most chord progressions do. I know I have a dominant here, a dominant here, a dominant here, and a dominant here. Now the reason I like to find my dominants first is dominant function chords are very limited in where they can resolve to and how they can resolve. Dominant function chords in most cases have to resolve to tonic function chords, which means they have to resolve either to 1 chords or 6 chords. And when they resolve to 6 chords, we call that its deceptive resolution, and that has a very particular sound to it. This next time through, I'm going to be listening for how each of those dominant chords resolves. Does it sound like it resolves authentically to a 1 or deceptively to a 6? I know where the dominant function chords are, so it's a matter of just focusing in on each one of those. Here we go. So I heard the first dominant resolving authentically to a 1 chord. I heard the second dominant resolving authentically to a 1 chord. I heard the third dominant resolving deceptively to a 6 chord. It was a very different type of sound to that resolution. And then I heard the final one resolving authentically to a 1 chord. So I found my dominants, and I found where the dominants resolve. Next, I want to dictate my bass line. Take a quick melodic dictation, because that's going to help me fill in some of the information I'll need to figure out harmonic function and chordal inversion. So here we go, listening for bass line this time. Now I did that rather quickly, and I would expect that it might take you a couple of hearings to get the bass line, and I'll put the stems on each of those notes. I heard 1, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, 7, 6, 5, 5, 1. I made my life a little bit easier by recognizing certain things. I was able to group certain things together. So for example, after my initial leap of 1, 4, I had a repeated note, stayed on 4, 4, and then I went right down a scale all the way to scale degree 5. 4, 3, 2, 1, 7, 6, 5. I have another repeated bass note, 5, and then that resolved to a tonic, 1. So the bass line can now help me to fill in some of the details. So if I take a look at this, I know that if I have scale degree 1 over a 1 chord, most likely that is just a root position tonic chord. I have something in the second measure. I don't know what it is yet. It has scale degree 4 in the bass, and it's not a dominant function chord, so chances are it's a predominant function chord of some sort. We'll figure out what that is in a minute. Here I have a dominant function chord, and I have scale degree 4 in the bass. Now, there are a couple of possibilities of what this can be, and as I think about it, the most likely option is a dominant 7th chord in 3rd inversion, with the 7th of the chord in the bass, which then resolves out to a tonic function chord in 1st inversion. This is where your knowledge of how dominant function chords should resolve comes in very handy. I now have another dominant function chord with scale degree 2 in the bass. It could be a 6-4. If I listen to it very carefully, I want to listen for the quality. More likely it is a 4-3. That is a dominant 7th chord in second inversion, which then goes to a root position tonic chord. I have scale degree 7 in the bass on a dominant function chord, so this could just be a plain old 5-6 or a 5-6-5. I'll listen carefully for whether there's a 7th in that chord, which resolves deceptively to a root position 6 chord. And then I have scale degree 5. I don't know exactly what it is, but I do know that the next chord is scale degree 5 on a dominant function chord, which most likely is a root position dominant, and in most cases I'm going to make it a dominant 7th, and then of course that resolves out to a tonic chord in root position. Now I can use my knowledge of how harmony is supposed to work to fill in these remaining 2 chords. Whenever I see a repeated scale degree 5 leading in a dominant like this, I know that I most likely am dealing with some sort of cadential 6-4 chord. So I'm going to mark this as a cadential 6-4. I'll mark it like this in one of the traditional ways to do it. Remember, there are other ways to indicate cadential 6-4s, but that's how I'm going to do it on this one. And then back at the beginning I have another chord where I have scale degree 4 in the bass. It's not a tonic function chord and it's not a dominant function chord, so I'm going to say it's a predominant function chord. And I have a couple of possibilities. It could be a root position 4 or it could be a first inversion 2-6. I'll have to listen carefully for exactly what it is. I'm going to guess for right now that it's a 4. And when I do this in my class, I don't make a big deal about the difference between a 4 chord and a 2-6. They have very similar sounds. So as long as my students can show me that we're dealing with a predominant function chord, then I will generally give them most of the credit for it. Of course, if they can listen more deeply into it and hear the chord quality and listen for whether there's a 7th in there, that's always a little bit better. So now I have a complete chord progression here, Roman numerals with inversional symbols and a bass line. It makes sense based on the rules of tonal harmony. 1-4, tonic to predominant, going to a dominant 4 with scale degree 4 in the bass, most likely makes it a 5-4-2, which would then resolve down to a 1-6 because that chord 7th has to resolve down by step. 3, 2, 1, we have either a 5-6-4 or a 5-4-3 in that measure. Either way, it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference there. And then we go 7-6, and whenever I hear 1-7-6, I'm thinking 1 to 5-6 or 5-6-5, going to a 6, and then I have 5-5-1, which is the hallmark of a cadential 6-4. I want to proofread it by listening to the progression again with my harmonic progression, my Roman numerals written underneath it. So you'll notice the things that I absolutely have to know before I start this harmonic dictation. The things that I kind of assumed that if you don't know this, this makes your life a whole lot harder. In fact, if you're sitting there thinking right now, how in the world did he get that? Chances are this is the information that you don't yet have memorized and internalized. That is, I know how harmonic progression works. Tonics move to predominance, move to dominance. Dominant function chords resolve in just a handful of ways. If it's a normal dominant, it will resolve authentically to a tonic, and it could also resolve deceptively to a submediant, that is a 5 going to a 6, and those have very different sounds. Whenever I have scale degree 5 repeated before a cadence, it most likely is that idiomatic cadential 6-4 figure. By doing a little bit of melodic dictation of the bass line, that also helps me to figure out what's going on in this progression. And what I have here is actually a completely correct answer to this harmonic progression. And that's how you take a harmonic dictation. I'll create some more videos later on in which I make this a little bit more complicated. I'll change the texture, I'll throw in some chromatic chords, and maybe even throw in some modulations. But we'll save that for another day. For now, it's a good idea to just practice taking a very basic harmonic progression, harmonic dictation. Well, that does it for this video. If you found it helpful, as always, please like it. Feel free to leave constructive comments below, And, as always, make sure you subscribe to my channel to find out about the latest music theory bites as they become available. Until next time!